Hello. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. We are incredibly excited to have this conversation with you all about the new frontier of medicine where sickle cell disease is concerned. I am Dr. Lakia Bailey. I am the one of the founders and executive director of the Sickle Cell Community Consortium, and I am joined by the fabulous Dr. Rowley.
Hey there, hi there, ho there. Today is fabulous, wonderful Wednesday. This is Dr. Carolyn Rowley speaking to you from California, and I am the founder and executive director at Cayenne Wellness Center.
Wonderful. We are really excited to speak with you all today about this new world in which we find ourselves in, and we find ourselves at the forefront of this changing landscape, specifically where things are concerning sickle cell and our newest treatment options. Of course, we know we have disease modifying drugs, and we've seen more and an increase in those. And by increase, I mean two new ones, which doubled what we had to four. So it's not the biggest of landscape, but we have these drugs, and now we are looking into the world of curative therapies. And so today, instead of getting into the very details of the science of what that means and the different ones, we've talked to you all before about some of them, and we will spend much of next year really get into the science of all of the different curative therapy options. Today, we're going to talk about the general concept. What does that look like for us? What does it mean to us? What would we need to hear and know to even consider a curative therapy options? And we're excited to talk to you all about that and to have several individuals from companies working on curative therapies here with us to really hear what we have to say and to listen to our thoughts, our feelings, our opinions on this matter.
I agree. And again, I like the phrase new frontier. Um, though gene therapy, quote, has been around for over a decade, I think more and more, particularly since we started this webinar in 2021, our goal is really to share with you the information because we know that you're thinking about it. You're thinking about it for yourself. And so, but you need information, lots of information. And you know what I've always said that anything new always takes 4, 5, 6, 7 times to be able to hear it before someone can actually repeat it back, which means that they finally understand it because they can actually communicate about it. So that's what we're here to do today is just talk about what does that look like for you? What are you thinking about? What are your expectations? And what questions do you have? So that's what we're here for. And we're glad that you are joining us.
Awesome. And we are excited to have here backstage, bring them up for a brief moment, is our two representatives of companies that are in the forefront of this space. We're excited to be joined by Scott McGugan with Vertex Pharmaceutical, and we have Dr.
Shala.
Chala, Chala, Chala,
Your bio.
Chala of Bluebird Bio. Hello.
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 Nice to be with you all. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
We're excited to have you all here and really, really glad that you all want to hear from the community and want to listen to our concerns, our thoughts, our feelings on this.
So, Scott, you want to introduce yourself and the company, and then followed by Dr. Chella?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. My name is Scott McGowan, and I am a dad. I am a nerd, and I am proud to serve as the lead for patient advocacy on our work in sickle cell disease for Vertex Pharmaceuticals. We are a global biotechnology company based out of Boston with a mission to invest in scientific innovation to create transformative medicines for serious diseases like sickle cell disease. We like to think we're a different kind of company. We go after some of the most difficult scientific problems and always focus on addressing the root cause of disease rather than the symptoms. At the end of the day, our goal is to transform the lives of patients, and it's a passion shared by all of us at Vertex. At Vertex, we are continuing our research for gene editing approaches for the potential treatment of sickle cell disease using a type of technology called CRISPR-Cas9. We're currently in clinical trials and have not been approved by any regulatory authority, but hope this might someday provide a new treatment option for patients living with sickle cell disease. More than that, though, we're incredibly excited to be one of many companies exploring the application of these new technologies to provide potential new therapeutic options. After decades without innovation and new treatments, the sickle cell community deserves not just one, but multiple options and the opportunity to make decisions with their healthcare provider about the most appropriate course of treatment. Today, I'm really grateful to join in this important discussion about the investigational approaches being studied in sickle cell disease. At a time of such incredible advancement, it's critical that patients, caregivers, supporters, and advocates are empowered with information about these new technologies and how they might one day play a role in helping warriors in their communities. Vertex will be holding a town hall with the consortium and Cayenne Wellness early next year to share a lot more information with the community about gene editing in our program and take any questions that you might have. As we continue our work, there's no more important voice than that of the sickle cell community. And we as partners need to understand and be guided by the thoughts, needs, and a fundamental understanding of how we can best support and empower the community during this time of scientific advancement. For tonight's program, we are primarily here to listen. Tonight is about you and how we can best support you as we keep doing our work every day and understand how these advances might one day shape the care for the sickle cell warriors. So thank you all very much. We look forward to listening and learning from you tonight. And as always, appreciate the opportunity to engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And the lovely Angelica Chala, if you can introduce yourself.
I always say such nice things, Dr. Rowley. Thank you so much. And thank you to Dr. Bailey. And thank you to this community for inviting us to join in. And I will echo Mr. McGowan as far as just saying how much it's important to me to be here and listen and join in the conversation. I belong to a group called Bluebird Bio. It's a company also based out of Cambridge. We're focused on gene therapy for sickle cell disease, thalassemia, and something called cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy. Say that 3 times fast. I'm also a mom of 4, though my youngest is 10, so she's not a baby anymore, but they're all growing up like crazy. I'm also a practicing pediatric hematologist oncologist at Hasbro Children's Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. And I'm a professor at Brown University. I have had a passion and interest in sickle cell for about 20, we won't say how many years, 20 odd years, and have been followed my patients as they've gone from infancy into adulthood, and have seen that though we've made so much progress, and with the community, joining in with the medical community, that we are beginning to build trust. In the pediatric population, I think we've really started making some true advances. I think we need to do the same thing for our transitioning patients into adulthood, our adults, and our later adulthood folks as well. And again, one of my beliefs is that sickle cell is a genetic disease. It progresses over a lifetime. And if we can find a curative intent option that stops the disease in its tracks, so you don't need to take medications, you don't need to be on transfusions, you don't need to be on all these things, and live a life that's not determined by your disease, is one of our goals. So how can we do that? With transplant, with allogeneic stem cell transplant, that is an opportunity, but it comes with a lot of risk, and you need to have a matched sibling donor. Or in clinical trials, there are haplodonors. There's other ways of doing transplants that are advancing, but I still think are a little early, and also in clinical trials. With gene therapy, the idea would be is that you do not need an external donor, that the person can serve as their own donor with genetically designed cells that have either gene edited or a gene added or a gene regulatory change to make the proteins you need to not sickle. So I think this is the truly cutting edge. It's really exciting because, again, 5 years ago, before I joined Bluebird, it was really funny. I was just saying, I would have patients come to me and say, hey, what about gene therapy? They keep saying it's just a couple years down the line. I'm like, oh no, we're 20 years, 30 years. This is going to take a while. We've been promised gene therapy since I was in training. It's here, it's coming. And it's the same sort of thing. These are still in clinical trials. These are still being studied. And what we're beginning to learn is that when we make a change in a gene in somebody's stem cells, once we make that change, the good part is the change is for good. You do not need to take other medicines and do other things to support as far as the active sickling. But what is also the downside of that, of doing a one-time therapy, is that it's irreversible. Once it's done, and you really have to follow for a lifetime to find out what the side effects are and to see what happens for the future. There's some things that we can predict, and there's some things that we can't at this time, and it still needs to be studied. And one of the things that I do want to share with this audience, I can't study this. We can't study this. None of the companies can study this without your help and what you need to know and what makes it more powerful to make sure that we meet your needs. And that's really why we're here today, is to hear some of that. I can say that again, with this wonderful group of people, we've gotten some ideas, we've gotten some start points, which is why in our clinical trials, we've heard that for infertility is an issue and that concern. So we're talking about, can we do fertility preservation? How do we do that? How do we do that for younger patients? What are the things that patients need to know about? Well, reduction of pain, improving their symptoms, improving fatigue. So we have been studying about patient-reported outcomes, and we really want to delve into that more deeply and also find out exactly what does this mean for somebody to have some success? What does this mean to control or stop the disease? So this is what I'm here for today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this and listen in. I really can't wait. This next few years are going to be so exciting for sickle cell disease. Things are accelerating. ASH this year, there was so much about sickle cell. ASH, of course, is the American Society of Hematology meeting. There was so much going on, so much excitement. I haven't seen this much in the last 20 years. So this is going to continue, and you need to be part of that conversation, and we want you to be part of it. So we're all ears, we're here for you, and happy to give whatever information I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Challa. Wonderful. So I think, Dr. Bailey, we need to find out if our audience, to remind our audience that they at this point can start sending their questions in so that we can address those if they have questions or comments.
Absolutely. And I've posted that as well in the chat, that this is a conversation. As we said at the beginning, we're not really focusing on the science this go round, because the science is very rich, it's very deep, and there are a lot of scientists that are dictating this space. It is not just one process that's happening here. In fact, the two that spoke here have two very different things going on. And so instead of focusing on that, we will be bringing you much more education that we've brought to you in the past, and we'll be continuing it. Instead, today, we want to talk about what this new space looks like. You can, of course, put your information in the chat, share your questions where you see it anywhere on Facebook, and we will be checking all of those. I think to start with, I would like to sort of start with this idea of this is a brand new kind of a world. We are looking at, when I think about Star Trek and the future of medicine, that's where we are. I thought it was very, very powerful when you said we're here now, because that's exactly where we are. We are here now. We are looking at how to alter our own DNA, alter our genes. We're looking at how to be our own cure. And I think that's a very interesting concept there. But the question is, with this being so new on the frontier, and the thing I think we should talk about, Dr. Rowley, is what is that going to look like? Is this something that this community in large is interested in? I know we hear about, well, we want the cure, but a cure, as it turns out, isn't as simple right now as a pill. It's not as simple as one overnight stay in the hospital and it's all better. Moreover, the cure as it exists right now, it does not get rid of old damage to your body. So what will that look like for us? And is that something the community is interested in? Now, I can start for myself. I am very interested. It also frightens me. The idea, just full transparency, frightens me. And I was at a meeting once a few years ago, and someone said that they're not that brave. And when it came down to it, I realized that bravery is probably not the right response. but I am that desperate. I am that desperate for a new life, for the compounding of sickle cell to
Mhm.
stop adding and dumping and beating on me. And I am interested as up to a point, once I can see this, that it's working.
Mhm.
And I would even be willing to be among the first, but I would really need to see it. I'm the kind of nerd that wants to know, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? What does that do? Why does it do it? What exactly do I need to do to give myself my best chance? And I think that's
Well,
the first
let
part.
me well, let me weigh in. It's funny because I'm glad that the two of us are doing it because I'm opposite. What's interesting is I still recall, oh my goodness, 22 years ago when we had a support group, and there was a person, an older person, who found out that she had sickle cell at age 30 or 40, and so we talked about that knowledge of not knowing and living her life, and then what that looks like now knowing. And it didn't change much, but I really do believe that having and living with an illness that's been defined, and sometimes people do define themselves. We had discussions about this was 20 years ago. What would that look like to have a cure? Well, for myself, I, on the other hand, I like new technology. I have to say for myself, I'm not interested. Let me tell you why. Only because I've taken a lot of time to manage well. And so for me, the unknown is something where I'm not even sure how I would even manage that. Whereas with having sickle cell, I manage well to not be in as often. I manage well not to have a lot of organ complications, and I manage well. Now, are there things that I wish I could do? Oh, yes. I wish I can go to Machu Picchu, but how would I do that when the altitude? And I've even thought, oh, I can just have my oxygen. I'm not going to tempt that, although I would love to be able to do that. So there are things that I would like to do, but I feel that I've managed well and I haven't been defined, and I've done most everything that I've wanted to do. So I think knowing that there may be complications, how would I manage that? Whereas the complications that I may have with sickle cell, I pretty much know how to manage in this holistic perspective. I got that. So I think it's interesting because we are here. People are, getting into clinical trials, but we have two different perspectives in terms of I feel comfortable with how I'm managing and my knowledge of how to do it, and it's a little unnerving to tempt that and not know how I would manage that.
And you know what? You're right, because for me, my unknown is that I don't know what this disease is going to do next. I know that I am prepared for everything that I've experienced to this point. But there is that incredible, uncomfortable knowledge that my knowledge is insufficient. And I say that because I had a crisis recently. I've brought it up several times now. Was the single worst sickling event of my entire life. And I thought I knew what my pain scale of 10 was. I thought I had experienced my 10. And it turns out my entire life, what I thought was a 10 was a 6 or a 7. I was reintroduced to my 10. And I had inflammation in my brain, down my spine, all of my bones. And I knew sickle cell was bad, but it went from bad to worse in a matter of minutes. It went from me at the hospital, this is my 10, I need to be treated immediately, to, oh my goodness, that wasn't a 10, that was a 6, this is a 10. And my mother says I didn't open my eyes for days. I've never experienced that before. That's the unknown. I feel like with the curative therapy, I can research and prepare myself as best as possible but I have no idea what sickle cell is going to throw at me tomorrow.
And you
And
know,
if I can block that, I am there. I'm here for it.
and I think that, you know, I'm glad that we're doing this because I believe that we represent these two sides of the coin, if you would, in terms of people thinking about participating and having had their worst 10 often, and those who are living in this space and learning how to manage. I think we might represent those two sides in terms of people
Mm.
wanting to explore and what does that look like. Um, because we've had so many people participate in our webinars and they've asked great questions um, because they want to know more. And is it right for them? And also, too, there are different types. So not only is it right for someone, but now they have to even explore, almost like buying a car, which is going to be the right one, the best fit for them and what they go through.
Dr. Chala, you had a comment here that I think is directly connected to that.
Yeah. People are diverse, right? We all come from different backgrounds, different beliefs. We're in different parts of our lives. And sickle, as we know, one person's sickle cell disease is not the same as anyone else's. Everybody has their own journey with sickle, at least, and that's what I've seen with the couple hundred patients I've taken care of, right? It's really, I've not seen one person that I can say, oh, you know, I can tell you that this is going to happen because I've seen it before. Every journey is different. And so the therapies that need to be out there have to be adjustable, and their options need to be for everybody with their own sickle, where they, and to meet them where they are in their life. A great conversation I had was with one of my young gentlemen who was terrified of transplant, not willing to consider it, but was like completely adherent to his hydroxyurea, and it worked great for him. But when he hit about actually 25, 26, he actually had a son and was watching his son as a toddler, and he went in for an acute chest that really, really knocked him under. So with that kind of experience, that's when he said, for me, knowing that, as Lakia said, sickle could be worse than I thought it was going to be. And now I've had my son. I want to make sure, what does this mean for me and my chances of living long enough to see him graduate and get married? So all of a sudden, that risk of transplant and thinking about it became a different story. And I think we need to meet folks where they're at, but we have to have all these options available so people can see where they are and allow people to change their mind. That it's not something that's static that happens. This is a one-time deal, guys. Take it or leave it. It's one of those things where it's going to be a journey. All of these medications, all of these therapies really are going to be in conjunction with one another. And there's going to be some times for each and every one of us, for my own meds, for my own disease, that you don't do it. You don't do any of it, even if you know it's not the right thing to do, because you've got a life to live. So I think that's where we've got to maintain some humanness and some understanding, and really adapt to where people are at that time and have these options available to everybody who wants them.
I agree. We're just so very diverse. And it's very interesting to think about it because I do not feel that having this disease, well, let me change that. Yes, it has hindered me in some ways. There are things that I would have done and I know that I can't do. You know, I'm with Dr. Rowley. I have always wanted to go to space. And I remember when they were talking about the astronauts and NASA recruitment, and you have to do this and this. And I realized I checked so many boxes. Excellent in science and math, excellent in the concepts of physics and engineering. I checked off all the boxes, and yet I knew I would never be an astronaut because my body would never allow it. I would never make it through training. I knew that. And I remember even having the thought, even if I knew there was a 90% chance that I would go into a severe fatal crisis the second I hit the outer atmosphere, I'd probably still go because that's how much I wanted this. And I know that there are things that it has stopped me from doing, but I don't think it's ever stopped me from doing the things that matter as far as like career, as far as those kinds of things. But I do know that I make a lot of decisions because of sickle cell, that it alters my thoughts and plans, and that I have to consider sickle cell almost first before I consider anything else. And the idea of having an option where that might not have been. At this point, I do know that it would have been better had I done this when I was younger. I do know, and that's a conversation that's come up quite a few times with caregivers. My own mother said that if she could change anything, if there was one thing she wished she knew how bad that it could get. She had no clue. And I didn't either. When I was younger, if you had brought the idea of curative therapies, I would have rejected it hands down. Like, why? But I thought I was invincible. And now that reality that I am not, it has changed the way that I think I process and see things. And so I do wonder if any of this conversation would be different if we knew up front just where this was going. There really aren't any natural history studies in this sickle cell space, not any comprehensive ones. Would it change anything? Because I do think it would have changed my thoughts. Had I realized what this would eventually become, I do think it would have changed the decisions I made when I was younger.
Well, it's interesting because yes and no. We have support groups and people actually are diverse, even in their own experience of having SS or SC or beta thal. And so you can have a older person speaking of their experience, but that older person with SS, SC, SD, SE is going to be different. So all we can do is have a kind of a clue as to what it might look like for parents, listening to adults speak about their journey. And then back in the day, again, you mentioned it earlier, these modifying therapies weren't available.
Mm-hmm.
So now that the modifying therapies are available, that means that parents have more to choose from, and with the hopes that their child will not spend as much time in the hospital as you or I may have actually spent. And so, with not spending as much time in the hospital, being hospital free for a period of time, again, I think that changes the landscape too in terms of whether or not they're thinking about curative type therapies. Because right now it looks different. When you and I were younger, or I can speak for myself, I was in the hospital more often and suffered pneumonia all the time and was put in those little tents. And so that was then. But now it doesn't look like that. And for younger people who are having access to these modifying therapies, I do believe that parents have choices, more choices than ever before, in terms of whether or not they even need to think about that, because this modifying therapy, which is the least invasive, if you would, seems to be working. We also have one of our sickle cell warriors, Shirley Powell, who um, she was pain free. I want to get this right, for at least 25 years. 25 years. And then when she moved, I don't think it's California, but when she moved to California in these last 5 years, she's been in the hospital a couple of times. And I just think that has to just do with the transition of getting older as
Mm-hmm.
well. So I think many of us, we for those of us who want to gain control, we search and we look at different things that we can actually do to feel better over the long haul. And she found that for herself, even in terms of getting a degree in naturopathy. So, but now we have these curative therapies for people to think about, and maybe their child is suffering more, even with these modifying therapies, and it's something for that parent to think about.
I wonder how much of our community is aware, though, that damage is being done to our bodies, our bones, our tissues, our organs, even when we're not in pain.
Even we're not in
That
pain.
this, I think that our community has this concept that if I'm not in pain, then sickle cell isn't harming me. And we have some interesting thoughts here about access, that we have these options, but what does access look like? How
Exactly.
much will how much this costs weigh on a patient's decision to even use it? I know right now for the bone marrow transplant, most of us that do it or try to do it through a trial, because outside of a trial is incredibly expensive and it is not accessible.
Hmm.
Um, Dr. Tamia Austin has a question that's up there now. How much does this weigh on patients' decision to use the therapies? I think it's got to weigh heavily. I had to do an entire GoFundMe trying to get the funds that I need when I was attempting to do a bone marrow transplant. And then I lost my donor. And so now I'm back at the ground floor. And who knows? I'm aging out at this point. I'm 43. So I was coming in right at that mark, right at the 40 mark, and I'm aging out now. But that accessibility, I think, is a major concern and something that we really have to be thinking about. Because what difference does it make if I can cure sickle cell with a pill if that pill is going to cost me $2 million and I can't get it?
Correct.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most critical things for all the work that we companies are doing to develop the medicine, to study the medicine, and hopefully bring forward something. We also have teams of people trying to figure out how do we ensure that patients actually have the ability to have access to it. And that's decisions that we make inside as a company. It's also how do we work with states? How do we work with Medicaid plans? How do we work with payers to actually ensure that this can be an option for those people who choose a potential therapy with their physician? So this is absolutely critical, because at the end of the day, if we've produced something incredible and an incredible scientific advance and people can't have access to it, then we haven't done our jobs. I think the other really important thing to keep in mind is there are already some gene therapies that have been approved and that we're getting some experience with and seeing ways in which people are being able to have access. So we, and I'm sure our colleagues in the industry, are all looking at the examples being set right now and trying to figure out how can we all work together to find solutions to make sure that this is an option for those who would make that choice with their physician.
But going back to Dr. Bailey stated having to do a GoFundMe, again, I'm curious, for those outside of, like you said, clinical trial, how is everybody doing a GoFundMe? Um, is it only for the privileged? What does that look like? We need to have a little bit more discussion on, the gene therapy is here. It's been here for a while. We're talking about it more. We want you all to gain some level of understanding, but we really have to go back to basics. Um, what is the cost in terms of not just in terms of financial, the cost to the family for being able to even try to get those funds or sacrifice or what have you, and putting all their hopes and dreams into that particular therapy. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think these are things that we think and take very, very seriously, because, for instance, for many of the gene therapies that have been approved to date, there is coverage by insurance companies, by Medicaid programs that make things available for patients. So we are trying to think through all the possible angles. And to your point, and I see a comment that's come through, it's not just the cost of a therapy, it's also everything that a patient or a family would need to do in order to make that an option. We know that from bone marrow transplant, it's a long procedure, and making sure that people are supported in making those types of decisions is really, really critical. And so something that we do take very seriously and are thinking through.
We have a question or a comment from Dominique Goodson that says, for me, it weighs a lot that there are barriers that pharmaceutical companies don't think about, whether this is part of the modifying therapies or the upcoming curative therapies. Um, it's the costs are great. They're astronomical to some degree. And then, just speaking about the modifying therapies, um, for um, for some, it's even hard for them to even get approved. Sometimes the insurance wants you to use another drug that you may have already used in the past before you can even consider that. So even right now for the modifying therapy that have been out since 2017 and 2019, it's actually even difficult to even access.
It is. And I think there's other types of barriers as well, things that aren't necessarily fiscal, but in some ways they are. You mentioned, Dr. Chawla, the fertility. And currently, all of the curative therapies that exist will leave you infertile, or a large, there's a very real chance that you will be left infertile. And I think that there's the things that I have noticed that are big issues are mental health, fertility, and then, of course, financial cost and access. And there's not a lot that's being done or offered as far as mental health support. And there's a lot to that. A curative therapy is a major thing. Having had this disease however many years is a major thing. And then your new identity without it is a big deal. And I remember when I used to do camp counseling at the sickle cell camps, we had children that would say they really didn't want a cure because then they couldn't come to camp anymore. Then they wouldn't be a warrior anymore. And those thoughts start young. What does it mean if I don't have this disease? And what will that mean, just for my life as I age? And I think all of that has to be thought about, considered, and addressed.
Definitely.
Yes. I mean, there's nothing else I can say to that, but yes. It's actually interesting that you bring up the camp idea. With one of the camps that I'm associated with, I actually went and spoke about gene therapies there. And they said, so, should we start planning for a different population because sickle cell disease is going to go away? And I'm like, no, where you will be somebody who has sickle cell disease to somebody who didn't and who survived sickle cell disease. That is going to take adjustment. The camps need to be available for the young kids. Social supports need to be available for the adults, because it is not just a loss of identity. It's the creation of a new one. How do you build that when it's all acute? It's all at once. So I think that is so critical. And mental health support is for anybody who has sickle cell disease, whether or not they're on a high cost drug, or if they're on hydroxyurea, or they're on penicillin alone. Everybody needs that kind of support, because the amount of pain, the current pain, the variations in pain, and then how do you not be a burden on your family and people around you? How do you keep your sense of self-worth is important all the way through this. So, and your role in society and a role of who you are. So mental health is important. Social health is important. And then when we talk about access and cost, I can tell you that people are thinking about this. We haven't come up with the answers yet. That's where the struggle comes, right? But we are, as we've been saying, is we're talking to state legislators to talk about, what does this mean? We need the community to also come along and remind everybody that sickle cell sucks. It really is more than just a blood disease, and the fact that it lasts over a lifetime and how it changes over a lifetime. We need people to say, a $2 million pill is worth it, because the cost of me living with sickle cell disease is going to be more than 2 million. And by the way, maybe you'll extend my life a few years that I can go do the things that I want to do. And maybe I want to go cure another disease. One of my patients has said that she wants to go cure cancer. Please, let's do this. Come on. So I do think there is something there that we need to talk about, that discussion about thinking past going from sick to non-sick and all the way to healthy. And the only way we can have that conversation is for the community to bring those forward. So I truly appreciate those barriers, because we see them. We're working on them. We're going to need your help.
Yeah, I think that is such a really important point, because there is no stronger voice than your voice in these discussions to help people understand the impact that the decisions they're making can have in the ability of warriors to make the choices they need to make, and to ultimately make the right choices with their physicians. For all the work that our colleagues are doing on working with legislators, and Dr. Bailey and I have had many of these meetings, to go help them understand sickle cell disease, to make them invested in finding a way to provide access, to find solutions. It really does start with the patient voice, and that's something we, would absolutely encourage everyone to reach out, to make those contacts, to get invested and involved.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a Carla Coffer. Carla Coffer asks, my issue that I have is my daughter was denied Oxbryta because she didn't show proof of failing hydroxyurea, which I had brought up before. Everyone chooses not to or can't take hydroxyurea. We should be able to have a choice.
Exactly.
And of course, we should be able to have a choice. And I'm hoping that that was the whole reason for the pharmaceutical companies to begin with, was to give us choice. But then on the other side, outside of pharmaceutical is insurance, and so they're the ones that are dictating, and they also, quite frankly, I believe that in all of our meetings, there should always be somebody from insurance companies who can also hear. We want our providers to understand the sickle cell warrior experience, but we also need to get the insurance companies, because they're making decisions in a vacuum, not truly understanding our human experience. And so you're correct. Um, the person may have not done well on hydroxyurea for whatever reason, and they should have a choice to start Oxbryta and/or Endari and/or anything else that they may want to try without having to do the step therapy. First, try this and see if that works, and then try that. So, totally agree with you, Ms. Coffer.
I agree. And I see your question, Dr. Chala. Carla, if you could type in, what did they mean by failing hydroxyurea? I know in my um, case, they wanted to see that for multiple different things. But first, they wanted to see that hospital stays had not decreased and that hemoglobin had not increased with hydrea. And then they wanted Oxbryta in order to go on the is it Advecchio?
Adecvio?
Advecchio, is that Oxbryta's other name, or is that the other drug? Okay,
That's yeah,
I'm
that's
I'm getting them all
it's
confused in
okay.
my mind, but I had to show that Oxbryta, and the interesting thing is, Oxbryta shows improvement without increasing your hemoglobin, so that isn't even a viable measure. But they wanted to see that they wanted to show that hemoglobin is not responding, and it's insane that they do these step therapies in order to offer you these options. And I've told people hydroxyurea is not the cochlear implant of the sickle cell community. It's not a panacea. It's not available for everyone. Not everyone wants it, and it doesn't work for everyone, but it is treated as though it is. And it's one of the reasons I think it is so important, because I would hate to see us denied curative therapies because disease modifying therapy should work for you. And so keep doing that
Exactly.
forever. And that would be a horrible thing to see, but I wouldn't be surprised if those things were put in place. So we do have to have these conversations up front. And I think it's going to be incredibly important to get Medicaid, Medicare involved in these conversations, considering the large percentage of warriors that are on Medicaid, Medicare. We can't assume that private insurance will handle it, because that's just not an option for so many of us. Mandy says she loves this discussion on identity, that it is so important. And she had said that earlier, and I agree. It is incredibly important for us to be thinking about those things. People are commenting about the step therapy and that being a problem, and how individuals are saying that they're being blocked from access
Yes.
because of this. And I think it's very curious that individuals that are not doctors, that are not trained in medicine, that do not, are the ones that can then make the decision on what my doctor has prescribed, but whether or not I should have the option to try it. That's just a flaw to me. It's a flaw in our entire system that these decisions are being made, that those that are individuals who don't have the medical training to be making these decisions.
Another thought that came to mind is besides the sickle cell warrior and the family making a decision about curative therapies, where do their physicians come into play? And so I am curious about that. Are how many physicians are even broaching that topic to their patients? How does that conversation even come up? Is it does it come up because the parent saw something on TV and or the warrior heard something in one of our meetings that we do? Um, my thing is, where are the physicians, the hematologists, in terms of course, they're aware of gene therapy, they're aware of the science, and so they should be aware of the modifying therapies as well as the gene therapy. So I'm just curious about where their voice is in terms of sharing that information with their patients.
I think that's an important question. Have your doctors talked to you about curative therapies? Because we find that our doctors don't often even talk to us about clinical trials and simple clinical trials that we could be participating in. And then often, when you hear the conversations behind the scenes in the science meetings, the burden for that failure of recruitment is often placed on patients. The patients don't. But we can't participate in trials that we were never made aware of. And I don't think that burden should fall on us, because it's not our burden to bear, for one, but also we're not being told of these things. And curative therapies, we've had these conversations with multiple different individuals from different stakeholder groups, and there's this need to have a better understanding. And then there's the misunderstanding of what that will mean for the physician. If I put my patient in here, what will that mean for me and my workload, and what am I responsible for? And I think that is an unfortunate barrier as well, because I would hate to not have an option that should have been made available to me because of paperwork.
Or not staying abreast by reading articles that come out, and that happens too.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have
We
something.
have a new question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mhm. Mandy Young, how does progress with sickle cell disease gene therapy compare to other diseases, like, of course, cystic fibrosis?
Do either of you want to take that? Because I can weigh in there.
I'm happy to share some thoughts. I think if we look historically, sickle cell disease has never gotten the same amount of attention as these other conditions. Cystic fibrosis is often the one that it's compared to, which has received many-fold the amount of research funding, many-fold the amount of companies and researchers looking at it. So this is something that historically has generated, where in 2019 we had the third and fourth medicines approved for a condition that was first described in medical literature in 1910. So right now, that's a historic inequity. What is really good about today is that right now we have more than 60 different agents being studied in clinical trials, according to ASH. So there is finally attention being paid. And we're pleased, and I'm sure my colleague from Bluebird would say the same thing about being part of this recent surge in investment. As far as gene therapies, right now there are more than 1,000 applications at the FDA for clinical trials in gene therapies and genetic therapy approaches. Sickle cell disease is actually towards the front of that wave of people investigating the potential applications here because of our understanding of the biology and the potential for us to actually apply these adversity. So in this case, in cell and gene therapy, sickle cell disease is actually towards the forefront, which is hopefully a wonderful thing, and we're all very excited about trying to bring these things forward as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
I think that, you know, when we're looking at things like that, there are also a number of biases that are coming into play, additional biases there. And even when it comes to access to curative therapies, we had a physician to say in one of our focus groups that their patient wasn't even compliant on hydrea. So there's no reason to believe they'd be compliant in a curative therapies trial. And I was so horrified. You're not giving them that option because they're not compliant in hydroxyurea. And the individual saw nothing wrong with that statement. And I got the impression a number of the physicians around the table didn't. And it's the kind of thing that just makes a pit in your stomach for them, that there are a number of reasons why someone might not be compliant in a drug, and not the least of which they just don't like it. They made their hair fall out. It did not help enough to be worth it. And for that to be a hindrance for those that can make that decision about our lives to not even be able to, not even have to consult us about it, it's a big concern. And I think that these kinds of implicit biases, my sister's best friend, when she turned 21, I think it was, I flew her best friend in to 25. It was 25 to spend the weekend with her and put them up in, you know, nice hotel, did the whole thing. And her best friend was a nursing student. And she made the statement to me, sickle cell patients aren't compliant. And she made all of these absolutely horrifying statements that once I flew her home, I was done with her because it was frightening that she was a baby neophyte nurse, you know, doesn't know her ear from her elbow, but had already decided exactly who sickle cell patients are. And I think those biases also are blocking us from access to treatments and potentially to curative therapies.
Definitely. We were just having that discussion about just, you know, medical school is fraught with institutional racism from the very beginning. And there's just these implicit bias. And we talk about training that needs to actually happen. And people are talking about maybe we should get to them when they're a med student, second year, third year, but it's too late because the system is already fraught with racism. Someone said maybe we should get to them when they're much younger, but it doesn't matter because when they get into the system is fraught with this institutional racism. So they're hearing it from their colleagues, they're hearing it from the older docs, and so that is the bias. Can be a deterrent. But that's the reason why I think that we need to empower our warriors and the caretakers and everyone else in the space. Again, I said it before, you need to hear things 3, 4, 5 times so that you actually are able to consume that and be able to spit it back out. Know what all the modifying therapies are. It isn't to say for you to try all of them, but just know, you know, what they are. Hydroxyurea, Indari, Oxbryta, Adecvio. Just know that they exist. And as we delve into this next year with several of the biotech companies, we're going to get further into the science. So we invite you back to delve deeper to kind of have an understanding about gene editing. What is that? What does that look like? And what are vectors? And what are these terms? So we want you to know what these things are and be able to have this conversation and impress your friends. Yeah, I know what a vector is, or you know, gene editing, and they kind of slice whatever that is. We want you all to keep on um, gaining this knowledge just for yourself, so that you have it. And maybe it's something that speaks to you um, later on. I think it's the same thing with the vaccine. At the beginning, when the vaccine came out, many people didn't want to take it, but they've heard from other people who actually took it. They thought about it, and then they decided, okay, that might be for me. It's the same thing. It's the same process to hear about it, think about it, I may not have actually considered it. That might be something for me, whether it's a modifying therapy or a curative therapy. You just need to hear the information, and that's what we're attempting to do, is just to provide that. And to also, what are your expectations in terms of what does that mean? We're saying curative, which means cure, which means I no longer have sickle cell. But as we said earlier, whatever that damage that you had prior to, you still have that damage. It doesn't go away. So we want to continue to have these conversations and for you all to ask questions. And we have several that just came up.
And Mandy makes such a powerful point here. I just want to read this. She said, insurance talks about failing a drug. That's backwards. The drug fails the person. I like that. That is a very, very good point.
We need to use that.
We do.
I was going to substitute backward, but that's crazy.
That is good. I like that.
Me too. All righty. So Miss Carla Coffer again. I would need to know from our hematology clinic is what is the protocol, the algorithms, or the follow-up do they have set up for these treatments? And what special training has the staff gone through for these certain treatments? So I'm going to assume that you mean the modifying therapies that are FDA approved versus the gene therapies. And so that's a good question in terms of what training do they have to have? You guys can come in, but what I do know is that the pharma companies basically have salespeople who contact the hematologists and share with them, hey, have a new drug for your patients. And this is what it is. And they give them information to be able to learn more about it and what it's actually supposed to do. And so, for Indari, it's powder. Oxbryta, it's a pill. And for Adecvio, it's infusion. So
you know what? As far as training is concerned, Carla, unfortunately, the answer to that is none at all.
That's what I'm getting
They
to.
are under no obligation to learn more about the treatment options for your disease. And I don't know that there's a big push to make that something that has to happen. And I mean, no offense to any MDs on the line, Dr. Rowley, but MDs are notoriously the hardest group to teach new information. And you can try dozens of different things, and it's a very difficult group to grab. And
unless you take them out to dinner, but go ahead.
Yes. And even then, I was speaking to someone who was trying to do that in her state, and she would take them to dinner, but even then it wouldn't be a big group that would show. It was like pulling teeth to get these individuals to come to learn more about sickle cell disease. And there isn't a defined, this is training that you have to have. You have to know about all of these options since you treat sickle cell. It doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And you'll be surprised the amount of misconceptions that's out there. And I know that it's pushed heavily by even our own media, and just like we love sensationalism. So when we talk about curative therapies or bone marrow transplant, there was a story of a man whose donor cells was found in his semen, and media blew it up. And but what we never talked about is the fact that semen is predominantly white blood cells. Of course, his donor was found in the white blood cells, but it wasn't in the sperm cells. But the media never mentioned any of that. They blew that story up, and that kind of misconception. And then you'll be surprised because occasionally I'm having conversations with actual doctors, and they'll bring up these stories. And I'm like, wait, no. I mean, we're not having this conversation right now. This isn't accurate. And I love sci-fi. I can suspend disbelief with the best of them, but sometimes it's just so blatantly wrong that it's physically painful. And it's like, I can't watch any more of this. But this misinformation gets spread, and that's what spreads, and not the accurate information. And there's no obligation to get actual training because of it.
Dr. Chawla, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to take that step back with this awareness of both implicit bias and systemic racism.
Mhm.
We have a long way to go. I completely agree, but I do believe there's hope. I do believe that things are changing. So to think about this as far as being a woman of color, going into medicine, it was my mother is a physician too. And when she went through medicine, it was way worse than it was when I is. And I'm hoping it's going to be a lot better when my daughter goes through it. So the idea of that we have to make progress, it's a lot of work. We have to do it from all sides. And sometimes we have to literally bully the people who aren't listening in some way or other and keep bringing it up and keep bringing it up. But change does happen. It happens a lot slower than we'd like, but we have to keep at it. And I think we have to do it from all different angles. And I think, with sickle cell disease, again, our time is now. This is the time to bring these things to the forefront. And I think people are beginning to listen, not just hear, but beginning to listen. And the next step is to get them to act. And I think we're right there. We need to help them along with that.
I agree. I had the pleasure of attending the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, and Scott was had invited me to attend, and I was so excited because after one of these sessions, Scott, as well as GBT, had invited, and National Black Caucus Church Initiative, something, had invited me to come. But one of the amazing things that came out of that was the number of legislators that wanted to hear more, that want to learn more. They want that information. Our time is really right now. And I was asked a question, had we reached out to celebrities? And I made the statement that honestly, I think our champions are right here in this room. It's the legislators, it's the industry, it's the patients and caregivers that are fighting for change. I really believe that we are the hope that we want to see. And it really is right now.
Yeah, I think it's also important while we are working and trying to improve these historic inequities and the devastating impacts of systemic racism and implicit bias, that we're also not just focusing on helping people to learn, but also on holding people and institutions accountable to make sure that the hospitals, the facilities that are in charge of providing care are doing just that. They're providing objective, evidence-based medicine and high-quality care to everyone who comes through their doors, no matter what they look like, what their condition is. That's something that I think we can all work on, and something, again, make them accountable for it. Make it in their interest to ensure that the physicians and these medical staff who work in their institutions are fulfilling their oath as healthcare workers and providing high quality evidence-based care and helping the patients who they see.
I wanted to go back to the training because Dr. Chawla mentioned something. Do you want to read your own question? Because I think there is a difference between the modifying therapies and the follow-up regarding gene therapy.
Thank you. So the question raised about how do healthcare teams, how does the Sickle team learn about these various different therapies? And we mentioned one way of doing it. But as we talk about curative intent therapies, and it's one of those things that, guess what? As whatever damage has been done will continue. It may slow, but it may or may not stop. So it's one of those things that we are going to need hematologists, because we know transplanters do a great job of following in the short term. They're learning how to take care of people in the long term. But the best person who knows your body is your hematologist. That's my biased opinion, by the way. But with that being the case of that needing to be followed, and if we start doing these kind of therapies in a pediatric patient, they're still going to need to be transitioned into adult care. And they should be followed by a specialist who knows what to look for in sickle cell disease, not just what happened with having a transplant in your past. So I do think that there is a lot of teaching that still needs to be done as we bring these therapies forward. I do think they're going to become more common, be it transplant or gene therapies. And we are going to have this survivorship community, just like the cancer survivors have. And with that survivorship community, we need trained people who know how to take care of this, where it's the same as sickle and where it's the same as transplant, and then where is its own way of going through this path. So I do think that training question is so important. And it's one of those things that we're discussing about really thinking past not just a cure, but survivorship. What happens after?
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And looking past it, I think that's such an important question. What happens next? Now what? Yeah, I agree. We have comments that are coming through,
Yes.
also really talking about um, the biases that set in when doctors do finally get a chance to speak to a warrior, and how it can change the mindset. Different options, I think there are different things that we really need to consider when it comes to what it looks like to have sickle cell. Um, as we see, we have some more comments here. I have asked doctors for scientific data when I know that things are sideways. They don't like it, but it does stop the foolishness. I have asked doctors myself also. I can, that was from Vanessa Rhodes. And I do, because I've had a doctor just making some very strange decisions, and they'll tell me, "Oh, the data exists, but where? You know, what data?" Or when I forgot what it was. I think it was Toradol. I had asked for Toradol, and they were telling me that's counterindicated for sickle cell. It makes crises worse. And I'm like, where is that data? Please show me that study, because I'd really love to read that. And just all these crazy things that happen and they come up. But if we could, I think Scott made a really good point about accountability, and that I think is the piece that's very much missing. We can all complain about this is happening and that is happening. But until someone is made accountable for it, I don't see how any of that is going to change. Well, I want to, because I know we are over an hour, but before
Our
we,
time has
it's
I didn't even
gone, yeah. But before we wrap it up, I really would like to know, we've talked about some of the barriers and we've talked about, but what would our community need to see in place to make us say, yes, I will consider this. This sounds like something that I want to look into. I know I can start that with for me, I would want to see mindful thought in, yes, this might leave you infertile. Here are the things that are in place. Yes, we realize this is a lot for the mind. Here are the things that are in place for the mental health. Here is how this is going to be accessible, because we have to think about, even with the curative therapies, now what? It's not I'm going to get that infusion because of the conditioning and all of the different steps, and now it's done, okay, go home, you're good, because there's a long-term follow-up to that. And when I am sent home, I need my house to be a certain way. I need to have access to the right foods. And here's the follow up to give me my best chance. And for me personally, I would want to know that it's not just completely on me to give me my best chance, and that there is support available for that. And I'm curious what others might have to say about that as well. And we
Mhm.
can, of course, continue gathering information and share these things and other comments with you all that might come in after, because this will remain up afterwards. But what does it have to look like to make
Mhm.
our community interested and ready and eager, especially those that might not be? What could potentially be made available to help them say, yes, I want to learn more about this?
And then on the flip side, there are those who are ready, willing, and able right now. And for those, they do not know where to go to even follow up that thinking. So I believe that there are many in our community that are saying, I want to, however, they don't know where to go. And I think that part of the education as well is also sharing with them how they can find how we can lead them to that information so that they can actually explore. Maybe there's something in their state, it's not everywhere, um, but there are certain academic institutions um, that are doing it, and so maybe we can share with them how they can actually find those resources. But there are many people who are ready, willing, and able, and they just want to know, how do I decide? How do I choose? Because again, there's not just one. And I think, forgive me, I don't know who said that there were at least 1,000. Was that you, Scott?
Yeah, according to the FDA, there's more than 1,000 clinical trials in every disease involving cell and gene therapy. So there's
Yes.
a lot of interest, a lot of activity, and hopefully will translate to potential treatments in the future.
Yes. So yeah, like I was saying, I think on the flip side, there are people who are ready, willing, and able with even little information, and they just want to be signed up. And I think it's those folks that I'm saying, that's fine, but allow us to give you some information as well. Allow us to share with you, be aware of informed consent. Make sure that you read that and understand that. So yeah, I think we're representing both sides of the coin. And we have about 22 minutes. Um, I do see a question. Well, Vanessa Rhodes says, knowing that doctors have been training and tested, then to know the doctors why they want to participate. That's from Vanessa Rhodes. There's another one from Hope. Yes, there's a lot of conversation about long-term planning for people with diseases like cancer in terms of fertility, estate planning, home support, etc. But what about sickle cell disease? That's a good question. Are you guys aware? I mean, I know that with cancer, there are a lot of resources that are available, and I think I can't think of the top of my head what kind of resources are available in terms of home support and estate planning for people with sickle cell disease. Nothing comes to mind.
It sounds like that might be a need, and that would be something I'd love to hear a little bit more about. What precisely do people want? Exactly what's there for cancer, or can we even do better? I wonder if there's different ways of, can we make it more organized instead of having, 12 different societies putting 12 different recommendations? Is there a
Yeah.
way of doing something in a coordinated effort? And can we help with people so everybody, if they're following the same guidelines, they have a higher chance of having access to those extra things that you might need post and what kind of supports that you need. So I think, again, want to hear from everybody here. What are the kind of things that people want to make sure when they think about this? And I know this is a hard question because if you're here, it's unlikely you've been through a gene therapy, and if you have, or a transplant, and if you have, you don't know if you haven't, you don't know what you need till you get there. But I would love to hear and continue this conversation. And I mean, we did a little bit of this last year, but I'd love to do more of hearing folks that have been through curative intent therapies and say what worked, what didn't work, what more do they need, what kind of supports would have made things easier. So I think we need more of that discussion as well.
Exactly. So we are going to be wrapping up. I did want to state again, 2022 is exciting because we have these two biotech companies as well as others next year who will be doing a deeper dive into their particular science, which I think is going to be great. Again, for you to be able to understand and gain that knowledge. So that will actually occur. We'll be presenting that information in terms of the dates and times next year. I think we're going to be starting with Vertex in February, I believe, but we don't have an exact date and time. But I think this time frame seems to always work well with the previous webinars that we've actually done. So at this time, we are going to be wrapping up, and we're just waiting for Dr. Bailey to come back on screen. But I'm going to, Londa Lewis says, consideration for counseling for individuals and their families who later find that gene therapy is not an option for them. Exactly. So mental health needs to occur from the beginning to the end. It's just something, it's like maintenance for your body. We always forget about the brain body. And so it just needs to be something that we always just check in to see how we're doing. And it's for a lifetime. But particularly with gene therapy, it very much needs to be considered and offered. So definitely. Well, you're welcome. We're happy to have actually put this on with this new technology. I actually like it. So, we're moving on up, and it was wonderful. I hope this has been a great experience for you. And so we'll see you, Dr. Bailey. We still have about 9 minutes before we conclude at our 5:30 hour. And so everyone is saying thank you. Uh, Thank you to Sickle Cell Consortium and Cayenne Wellness Center. This has been great. Thank you, Londa Lewis. Appreciate it. We love doing things like this. Um, so thank you. And I would like to actually have you all both give some parting thoughts for people to just kind of consider. I know that we wanted to hear from them and what they're thinking and feeling, but if you all have something to be able to kind of summarize in a minute, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bailey and myself. But as we leave this conversation only to prepare for next year, why don't we start with Dr. Chawla and then Scott, and then Dr. Bailey and I will wrap it up.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be part of this. Thank you for putting this on. This is what I strive for always, is to hear what's going on, because we do get looped into our own little worlds, and we only hear from the usual suspects. I love to hear from everybody. I want to hear all the opinions, because we can't make this therapy better. We can't show what it does unless we actually hear what you need to hear. What is the data you need? Who do you need to hear it? How can we get there? And so this is very, very important to me. It's very important to Bluebird. I think it's important to all of gene therapies, and it's all important to all curative intent therapies, as well as disease modifying therapies. We want to do better for you. We didn't go into this just because this is a cool idea. It is a really cool idea, but it's not just that. It is really to make a difference for this population, this group of people, this amazing group of people that I really think has so much to offer, and to make some great strides. So come join us and let us join with you. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
I would echo pretty much the same thing. My final words would be two. It would be gratitude, and it would be inspiration. We cannot do this without the community. We need to be guided by the community, and we are so thankful for your partnership in helping us to bring forward something that we think could one day be a really important option. This is a really exciting time. It's also one where we're all learning together. And however we can work to ensure that the warriors and their families and their communities and everyone involved in making these really important decisions have the information they need to make that informed decision. That's what we want to do. And then how can we work to support you throughout the journey? So again, thank you so much. We are really excited for 2022, for additional town halls, additional opportunities to engage in these critical discussions, and really appreciate your interest, your engagement, and for welcoming us into these conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's the two of us.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. This was an incredibly important discussion. I'm glad we could have these conversations as we move, as Dr. Rowley was saying, into more. I do want to let everyone know that we will be continuing the education and sharing the science and what's going on with the details of gene therapy, gene editing, the different types. They are different. And we want to make sure that you all, especially those out there that are nerds like I am, like Scott said he is, we want to appeal to the nerd in you to learn and be aware of all of that, be able to ask the very difficult questions. And so we're excited to have more of that coming. And we really want to continue to have these discussions about what does this need to look like? What do we want treatments to look like? What do we want to see in our community? as you all know, I genuinely believe that the patient and caregiver is the most important voice in the room. And so we need to have you all's voices sharing with us what all of this needs to look like. And and it's always very interesting the things that you all do share, because we end up learning that for many people, the fatigue is worse than the pain. For many people, you don't necessarily want curative, you want disease modifying. And for others, you do want curative, but you need support. And we want to have those conversations with you. So thank you so much for joining us for this. And Dr. Rowley, thank you so much for partnering with us to host this.
Of course. Been a pleasure for the whole year. Look forward to next year. And again, I echo everything. Um, and I realize that here's the deal. So interesting. Had we not had sickle cell disease, how many of us would really know about sickle cell disease?
Yeah.
How much of the world knows about sickle cell disease, you know? And so we are amongst a special, groovy kind of people um, that we're involved in this community. We may actually be living with it, taking care of someone, mentoring someone. But I say that we're some groovy kind of people, seriously. Um, we use the word warrior, but the bottom line is it's something that we never would have known had we not been in this space. And now that we're in this space, I think that I'm hoping that you all understand that you are the one that we're doing this for. You are important. It's important for us to have this information, to be able to share it, for us to be able to talk about it. And I love the fact that, and there's no judgment. There's no judgment in scratching your head and thinking, um, wanting to know maybe, maybe not. What are they all talking about? What is all of this? All of it is okay. And I love that we actually create this space for you to know, not know, want to know more, how this affects you and or how it affects others. So again, I think the fact that we're able to partner, so thank you, Dr. Bailey and Sickle Cell Community Consortium, for both of us partnering in this new frontier. We began with that phrase. We're going to end with that phrase. This is a new frontier for those of us who are in this sickle cell space. Isn't it interesting that we weren't talking about it like this just 5 years ago? But now we're talking about it more because there's more people going into the clinical trials and considering it for themselves. So, on that note, um, this has been wonderful. I've enjoyed myself. Um, and it's so funny that you guys keep calling yourself nerds. See, I know I am. I don't know if I claim it, but I'm going to claim it amongst everyone else because I too love the science, love to read, love to stay abreast, love to talk about it, and I'm that person that needs to hear it 2, 3, 4, 5 times so that I can also have a conversation about it. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Angelica.
Thank you. Everyone have a good night.
Good night. I think we're still live, but you guys can all bring in your questions as well.
Yes.